There's more to web performance than the code you write. I want to begin this talk with a tale. A notable professional development company that's been in business for 60 plus years providing quality training to businesses and organizations. So I'm talking like team building, bias training, important stuff that a lot of businesses need. Well, we're living in a technologically advancing society, so they decided to translate their products and service into a digital platform. So they hired an in-house team to build this new site, which they can, push their products to a bigger market, and people can use it online. So again, they have their team of developers, and everybody's excited. They come together to build this product. They have like a tight deadline, and the total investment that the company is making is about $100K for like development and marketing. So it's a few days before the product launch, and the team's just ready to go. So a few days later, the product launches, and it's a complete bust. Nobody goes to the site. It's slow, it's buggy. But the team comes back and it's like, what's the problem? Like, the developer's like, I did what I was supposed to do. I built the functionality. It worked on my computer. I mean, the designer worked with the marketing department and got all the visuals to, have the brand recognition. Like, everybody did their job. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that somewhere along the lines, web performance fell through the cracks. There wasn't any manager of performance that said, hey, you better, meet this threshold. Everybody kind of did their own thing, and the lack of communication and the different silos ended with performance falling through the crack. And this company lost thousands of dollars. Now, this isn't a true story. It's fictional. I made it up. But, but a lot of companies face these problems, like, investing in these products, building these services, and it doesn't meet expectations. They don't get the investment that they think that they will get. But you might be wondering, what can we do about this? And kind of what's the problem? Well, a lot of the problem is that when we think about like the ideation all the way to product launch, there's key stages. And sometimes, developers and technical leads may focus more so on the implementation side and might not have much input on the strategic vision, or the product manager might be setting the requirements but not really thinking about like the technical constraints, and vice versa. There's a lot of disconnect and gaps between these cycles, and it's just like, this is where breakdowns can tend to happen, to go down the path. But when there's misalignment with teams, it kind of goes off course. But what do we do about this though? Well, the idea is that design and web performance goes hand in hand, and I argue that web performance can be designed. And the way that we can do that is we can use service design as a way to boost web performance. And that's what this talk will be about. But before we start, just a little intro about myself. So I use a human-centered, design-led approach to solve problems. I've worked with businesses, small, large businesses, to help them solve complex problems and realize innovation opportunities. I was trained in design innovation in the United Kingdom as a Fulbright Scholar, and before that, I was a front-end software developer and designer. And I'm so eager today to share with you how we can leverage the power of service design to boost web performance. So you might be asking yourself, what is service design? I haven't really told you what it is. So service design is a human-centered approach where we balance pretty much our customer journey and their experience with our business processes. And the idea is that we want to have a seamless customer experiences. But the key thing is that the cool thing about service design is that it's like a map between our customer-facing, human-centered experiences and what our business can produce. This is a key one-to-one map between those. And then we can identify kind of where our users are facing, web performance issues. We can map it back to some metrics. It kind of provides the context that we need, because a lot of times, many of you might be familiar with user experience, which is at a specific touch point, but we don't really see the full ecosystem, and the element of time, to be able to give that context. So service design just gives us a really good framework to use to kind of think about how we can consider our web performance experience of our users. So we can break service design into like two parts. So the first part is like the end-to-end, again, the customer experience, like over time. So we're talking about like aggregate user experiences, like when they're happy, when they're sad. And then the second part is digging a little bit deeper and looking at the business processes. So, for the case of focusing on web performance. It could be about running metrics and tests on specific pages and being able to map where the pain points are, but then zoom back out to kind of see the bigger picture of like where users are dropping out throughout the journey. So I kind of mentioned some of this already, but we can use service design to see where our user experience of web performance tends to break down and like what prevents them from like reaching their goals. So for the example of the professional development company, you know, the users not being able to even go to the home page, that's a big problem. That's a drop off, and it has to do with the performance of the site. So I have a question. How many of you have done a web performance audit? Cool, so a lot of you, of course, we're here, makes sense. So today, I'm gonna use the example of this company as a case study of how you can do a service design web performance audit, which is kind of like the step that you would do before you would do a traditional audit. So my talk is, I talk a little bit about the technical aspect of it, but the focus is really how to like bring it together to give the context. So we'll be touching on some of the stuff that you guys are already probably familiar with. So we'll break it up into two parts of the audit. So the first part is the end-to-end, looking at the user journey. And then the second part will be looking at running some tests on these trouble pages that we've identified. And then we'll wrap up with a bit of review and a kind of how can you put this into practice when you decide to do your next web performance audit. So again, the first part is the end-to-end journey. So again, going back to our example, we can break down our user's journey into key phases. So the first phase is awareness. So how do they find out about the platform? So it could be through word of mouth. It could be a loyal customer that, you know, has experience with the company and has decided to see what's going on with the new platform. So just any way that the user finds out about your service. And then the next step is how do they join? How do they sign up? They navigate to the registration and sign up process. And then onboard is where they, you know, get registered, you know, start to browse different courses, and then this continue onward into continuation, even like recommendations or organically leaving. But for the sake of this talk, we'll just focus on these first three phases. So the next thing that we're gonna do is kind of go through a user journey. So meet Helen. She's a busy business leader. She's HR. So she's on her lunch break. She's just scrolling, having a good time, maybe on Twitter or something. And she sees an advertisement for this professional development's new platform. And she's like, okay, I'm curious. I got a little bit of time. So she clicks and she gets to their homepage and she's like, okay, seems interesting. All right. So a little bit of time has passed. Maybe it could be that she decided to come back to her desk, or it could be days later. She decides, what the heck, I'll sign up. So she signs up. And then she gets access to the full portal. She gets to start to browse the different courses, bias training, team building, all different types of courses that she can bring back to her team. And then from there, she just continues to kind of like test it out, take some course, you know, go through taking a course and continues on until she completes it. And everything's great. Does anybody notice anything interesting about this story? Yes, good job. No hiccups. This is how, and I could be guilty of this as well. It's like we tend to, you know, design for ourselves from our perspective. Of course, we want things to work, right? We don't, but it takes a little bit more energy and effort to think about alternate scenarios of what could go wrong. So let's back up for a moment and like think about what would make this a good user journey. So a good user journey is grounded in research. So we have to validate our assumptions, right? We can't assume that things are gonna work the way we want them to, because a lot of times they don't. So we have to, and user research is contextual. So when we do research, we have to think about a wealth of different things about our users. You know, who visits your site? You know, when do they do it? Where? How often? Why? And then to dig deeper to like their needs, wants, and frustrations. And that takes effort and time to be able to get that information. And it's really the foundation of using service design to do a web performance audit. All right, so let's go back. Can anybody guess where the first potential drop-off point could be?
Speed of the mobile.
Right, but do you know which step? Like, is it the second? Good job. Yep. If they can't ever access the homepage, you know, not everybody's patient. You know, maybe you might have somebody who's really vested in the company, like it's been there and knows that the company is credible in what they've done before, and maybe they'll give a shot, but some people are just like, I don't have the time, and they just keep going with their life. But then there's also another step as well, because once she logs in, and she gets into that online portal, the site can continue to be buggy and slow, and she's like, I don't have the time, and it just drops off. So those are kind of like the two key problem areas, and using this framework, we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into these steps and kind of see, run some tests and see what's really going on. And that leads us to our part 2, which is the service core real performance audit. So what we wanna do is we wanna start with good metrics, and good metrics are user-centric. So we wanna think about kind of everything from our user's perspective. So, first paint, first meaningful paint, and times interactive. We want to know, how long it takes for our server to respond. So that first paint allows a user to know, okay, something's happening. And then when we get the meaningful paint, it's like, okay, I'm getting the content that I find useful to me. And then interactive, now I can interact. I can, fill out my registration form or navigate to another page. These are all important metrics that we need to take into account. So the team, imagine we're, kind of working with the team, and they're doing this audit with us. So we're looking at our second step. So we run some tests on the home page, and we see that on desktop, it takes 3.5 seconds just to get anything to show up. That's ridiculous. Even longer for mobile, 4 seconds, people don't have the time. And we can see that these are slow, but when we dig a little bit deeper to see what's going on, they notice that, CS and JavaScript files aren't minimized. Oh, that's an easy fix, right? All I have to do is just minimize them, right? Big deal, right? And then, the static files have to be fetched each and every time. Okay, we can just, cache them, right? But let's dig a little bit deeper. Why are the files so large? Are we loading this huge banner, to try to, maybe marketing's thinking that they can boost brand recognition and get people excited about this new service. Maybe they're loading 12 fonts on the home page, who knows? And they think, okay, we want to elevate the brand, right? But it's kind of counterproductive because it's preventing the users from being able to access the site to reach the goal. So instead of moving forward, they drop off after the second step, then that's considered a failure, that's unsuccessful. So it's just kind of putting into context really kind of what are we juggling, what do we value, and kind of what are the trade-offs for certain decisions that we make. So let's just say Helen's patient, she's like, I really want to, get this training because it's so convenient for us to just do this online instead of having somebody come in-house. So she, decides to come back later, get on a more stable connection, she registers. We see that the metrics are even poorer because, she's got access to all these resources, so all these large video files, image files, just these resources for the course. It's just slow, it's buffers, it's just a painful experience for her. It's unacceptable. So when we dig a little bit deeper, we see that the execution time for JavaScript is just so long. And we also see that it's enormous payloads. So what's going on? So if we go back to the JavaScript, is it because, they had a tight deadline, they only had a few weeks to ship this out. So, there's a JavaScript framework that's available, to speed up, technical productivity, right? Developers don't have to spend time coding things from scratch, so they can just, use that somebody already created, right? Speeds up time. Why wouldn't you want to do that, right? But what if, that decision to boost their development productivity is causing their users to have, lack of productivity on their end? So again, it's just being able to weigh these decisions, understand really what's going on and the cost of our decisions that we make within a larger context. Because is it worth, losing certain users because, they can't access it on a spotty connection? I don't know. It's a kind of a discussion that has to be made to know, kind of what decisions are for that. The team finishes the audit and they're like, okay, we got the result. That's cool, right? So now what? What do we do now? So the team comes back together and the developers are kind of chatting among themselves let's think about, some of the solutions that we possibly use, right? So we can for that first page, we can just get a cache storage API, right? Or maybe a CDN. Oh wait, but we can, just make our site a progressive web app, right? That's what everybody's doing. We can do new web protocols or, a new DNS. But then one quiet person is like, wait a minute though, what's the end goal? And they're puzzled, like, end goal, what? But like the technical team, a lot of us, sometimes are kind of technologically focused, like just only considering the technological solutions, but sometimes we have to think about kind of like the wider context. Because we know for this company, they cannot afford to not prioritize web performance. They might go out of business if they continue to operate in the way they're operating previously. And the problem with being too technologically focused is that sometimes these solutions may not fully be aligned with like an overall like strategic goal. Because if the goal is for the company to promote web performance and have a culture that says this is important, we prioritize it, then maybe some technological solutions don't help us reach that goal. But this way of thinking is not just limited to just developers, it could be marketing people. They decide that they want to load these high resolution images and they think that it's boosting brand recognition, but it's preventing users from reaching a goal, then maybe it's not worth it. And for a product manager, it might be including developers in earlier conversations about, the direction of the product, even for, it's really set into stone. But how do we, provide this culture that boosts this web performance? It could be, bringing more people to the table, for these discussions, like reaching out to customer service representatives or technical support who know the needs and frustrations of the users and can speak to that, and have their input in there. And kind of using all of this to be able to kind of set a performance budget, because again, we live in the real world. This is not fantasy fairy tale. Like, we have to juggle our users' experience of web performance with business constraints and technical debt. Like, of course, we would want to create the fastest site as possible, but if it takes us forever to do it, is it worth it? And vice versa. We might want to be efficient productivity, but if our users don't use it, then we're not reaching the goal. So it's tough decisions that we have to make, but it's all about having these discussions to have team alignment and kind of starting backwards, starting from that end goal. So let's just think about the mountain as like the end goal. So if we start backwards, then everybody kind of has their eye on like, okay, this performance budget is like the target goal of how we prioritize web performance. And then everybody can kind of work together and actually stay on track instead of deviating, because everybody's working towards that same goal and there's team alignment and communication. I say all this to say that, design and web performance go hand in hand. And they go hand in hand because web performance matters. Thank you.
What are some of the common mistakes you've seen for perhaps like a startup, starting off? They want to do things, they have limited resources, they want to do the best job they can. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So a lot of what I find is just maybe being too solution focused, and not just technologically solution focused, but not necessarily taking enough time to understand the user's perspective and kind of like the pain points and needs and frustrations, to take that in consideration, or just kind of being limited within the team. So like, wanting those internal stakeholders, additional stakeholders input, because it takes time to kind of facilitate that dialogue, but it's very valuable. And it might seem initially as like a waste of time. Why don't we just start coding? We have a tight deadline. So it's just kind of like shifting priorities in the way of thinking.
I actually have a question. So
Okay.
You mentioned that brand and marketing, in your example, like put a lot of fonts on the page, right? And a lot of images in hopes to create brand recognition. Why is that they did not consider that this does come at the price of performance? And how can we change that?
I think because it's a disconnect, okay? So like the marketing people, they're not the people writing the code. They're not the technologically driven. So that gap in communication, they don't really immediately see the impact of the decision that they're making because they ship off the assets and then the developers are responsible for kind of working with it. So I think it's part of that and just not enough communication.
My question is more general.
Okay.
From a development perspective, what are the top 3 priorities you see from a performance perspective that are kind of the drivers of optimizations that you talked about?
Okay, so for me, of course, user experience, of course, but then again, comes with the caveat of being productive. So it's like being able to initially set like your threshold, which might be iterative, that you might not get it right the first time, but kind of working towards that threshold, which is a sweet spot for being able to manage technical debt, but also not compromising performance. So that's kind of a main thing. So I guess user performance, user experience of web performance, and then, setting a performance budget. And again, just collaboration and cross-communication. So going back to the topic of the marketing with the files and assets. So for a developer feeling comfortable enough to talk to the marketing developer and say, okay, you're sending me these files, but they come at a cost, and kind of feeling like they're in a space where they feel comfortable kind of communicating that.
So top 3, user experience, cost, and what's...
Collaboration, being open collaboration, cross collaboration.
Are there any user studies that you could point us to that would enable us to communicate this to teams and things like that?
That's actually a good question, because this is kind of like, my talk is a bit of a mix of 2 different methodologies. But if you're looking for like service design specific information, there's a blog, Practical Service Design, which is really good. Really, service design is pretty powerful because you can apply it to many different scenarios. I've specifically adapted what they call a service blueprint for web performance, but it could be any other problem. So I would say that would be a really good resource.
There was also a Meet for Speed a month, maybe a few months ago, that talked about, I think it was Meet for Speed, that talked about how cutting down 1 second made this one company $2 million. So that would be something great to bring to light.
WPO stats resource, it doesn't necessarily give you input on how to organize the flow, although some of those talk about it, but the impact, business impact, they definitely, all of those stories do that. That's why it's like top link in my slide, in my resources slide. So like really gold, I mean.
So in line with that question, with shaving off time and the additional revenue you might gain, would you say like, I'm sure there's a certain like cutoff, but would you say that if you're like, I don't know, 2 or 3 person startup, you can design like an ugly but fast website, would that be more preferable to like, slightly better looking versus like slower site?
I think that there's a spectrum that we have to involve, like, again, with the thresholds. It could be, what experience is acceptable for your user. So, I mean, in certain cases, usually it doesn't happen this way. It could be better to, prioritize user experience if your site is super fast. Like, add in a couple of seconds. It just depends, but I wouldn't say, like, one is better than the other. It's just being able to kind of understand what's, like, of course, knowing who your target audience is as well. That's key, because, you might not be targeting people on spotty connections, although you probably should, but I would just say it's kind of like a spectrum that you kind of have to take into account. It's not really just like one or the other.
Thank you.